The vaquita is the most endangered whale in the world. They're also the smallest and cutest of them all. Their existence has been put at risk by illegal use of gill nets to catch fish that could be worth their weight in gold. To protect this tiny cetacean, a giant group of people from all walks of life has been assembled. They'll have to protect the vaquitas from criminal groups while using all the technological tools available for marine conservation. This is how to save the vaquita. Hi, I'm Sasha, and you're watching Animalogic. The vaquita is one of the most critically endangered animals in the world. So what made these little porpoises so vulnerable? And what went wrong in our efforts to protect them? Let's start with the nice stuff. Vaquitas are one of the cutest animals alive. Imagine a baby dolphin panda wearing black lipstick in the shape of a smile. They're the smallest cetacean in the world. At 1.5 meters, these mini porpoises could fit in a bathtub, though we don't yet know if they like playing with rubber duckies. Their closest relatives are the equally adorable harbor porpoises, which live all around the North Atlantic. They're expert murky water hunters and use their sonar to capture prey in conditions few predators could. But because of this specialized hunting technique, the vaquita's range is limited to a small corner of Mexican waters. They live in one of the most beautiful underwater ecosystems on Earth, the Sea of Cortez, a place so full of life that Jacques Cousteau nicknamed it the aquarium of the world. This is a relatively shallow sea, at around 50 meters. The Colorado River flows into the Gulf of California, bringing nutrients into the sea and making the water murky and perfect for the vaquita hunting techniques. Outside of this zone, the water gets clearer, deeper, and less productive, which makes it unsuitable for the vaquita. So, in a way, the vaquita is trapped in this small aquatic paradise, a pocket of amazing beauty and biodiversity. One of the vaquita's most notorious neighbors is the Totoaba. At times, this fish has been more valuable than gold, which of course has attracted a lot of fishermen to the vaquita's waters. The Totoaba is an endangered fish. It can be up to 2 meters long and weigh up to 100 kilograms, which makes it the largest fish in the drum family. They control their buoyancy using a swim bladder, which is basically an internal balloon they can inflate or deflate to make themselves more or less floaty. A fish this size needs a massive swim bladder. In this case, it's about 80 centimeters long and able to hold the same amount of air as a soccer ball. Sadly, swim bladders are used in traditional Chinese medicine as a tonic believed to treat skin diseases and improve general health. The Totoaba's swim bladder is not only larger than most other fishes, but also thicker and more gelatinous, which is perceived as having additional medicinal components. These claims are absolutely false, but they've made the demand for Totoaba skyrocket. And since they've become endangered and their swim bladders more rare, the prices have gone up to ridiculous extremes. A fresh swim bladder can go for up to $5,000 US. Even though local fishermen only get a small cut of it, it can be more than they make in a year fishing legally. From there, it gets dried up and smuggled into China, where a kilogram can fetch up to $80,000. That's more expensive than pure gold or some illegal chemicals we can't mention on this show. Since this is such profitable business with so many competing interests, international crime groups have joined the battle for the Sea of Cortez and made it harder for conservationists and government agencies to protect wildlife. They harass government agencies and NGOs and try to keep these waters free of any oversight, while also implying local fishermen to illegally catch Totoaba. These fishermen often accidentally catch vaquitas, which are roughly the same size as their target fish. Because of the use of gill nets, the vaquita population plummeted from about 600 in 1997 to just 200 in 2008. And since the Totoaba boom, their mortality has gone up to close to 50% a year. As of this video's release date, there are only around 10 vaquitas left alive. So even though both species are protected, the fisheries are just too profitable for fishermen. And in some cases, even if they aren't fishing for these species, large areas become off-limits due to environmental protections. This is great for the animals, but it creates conflict between the animals we're trying to protect and the local communities who depend on fisheries for their survival. Local fishermen have depended on artisanal fisheries for decades. There are few jobs available outside the fishing industry, and some fishermen make under $10 a day outside peak seasons. To protect the vaquita, the government has banned gill nets. These are massive nets that catch everything in their path. They're cheap to make and use, but they don't discriminate and end up killing many animals besides the intended catch. Vaquitas, who are, of course, mammals, get caught up in these nets and drown, so it really makes sense to ban them. The area where they're most commonly seen is protected, and fishing here is completely illegal. This is called the Zero Tolerance Area, or ZTA. And it's illegal not only to fish there, but also to even sail in those waters. Without these protections, vaquitas could disappear completely in a matter of months. From the point of view of the fishermen, their most effective method of fishing and access to some of the most productive areas has been banned. And for a community that's already struggling economically, these restrictions are hard to follow. Wait, it's not all doom and gloom. There's still some hope for the vaquita. At first sight, the situation seems helpless, but there are lots of people working to save the vaquita. You might wonder, why? Why put so much time and resources into an animal whose entire population couldn't even field a football team? On a broad level, the disappearance of a species sends shockwaves through an ecosystem. We wouldn't only be losing the vaquita, we would also risk the collapse of the delicate balance of life in the northern Sea of Cortez. Also, lots of species have recovered from extreme population bottlenecks. Another marine mammal, the northern elephant seal, went from about 20 living individuals to a population 200,000 strong in just over a century. Bison in both North America and Europe recovered from near extinction due to breeding and rewilding projects. California condors went from 27 wild birds to 500 in our lifetime. So it's possible to save the vaquita. One of the reasons people tend to be pessimistic about the future of the vaquitas is that their numbers are so small, and they might not have enough genetic diversity to recover. So we asked Dr. Barbara Taylor and Dr. Lorenzo Rojas-Bracho, two of the top experts on vaquita biology and conservation, about this problem.
Well, I think it's an interesting lesson for conservationists of all types that deal with small populations, because when I came through as a graduate student many years ago, it was basically if you got below 100, you were unlikely to be able to recover because of loss of genetic diversity. And then it was like, oh, definitely if you're lower than 50, there were these rules of thumbs that were probably not bad rules of thumb for all the species in the world and given the tools that we had at the time.
But some species can survive or even thrive despite having a very small genetic pool.
Yeah, and a good example, San Miguel foxes or Iceland foxes. I mean, their coefficient of inbreeding is really high, and they've been there, right? Surviving, and we have to change the way we think sometimes about the genetics.
We had this sort of unique opportunity because Lorenzo and colleagues were getting samples from vaquitas in the 1980s, 1990s, when there were hundreds, so they probably had the genetic diversity that vaquitas have had for hundreds of thousands of years. And we could compare their level of diversity to ones that we got in 2015, and there was no loss in genetic diversity. So basically, they didn't have any to begin with, so, they're less vulnerable to losing it.
So in other words, the vaquitas can recover. But the first thing that needs to happen is we need to stop vaquitas from getting caught in gill nets. To protect these adorable cetaceans, the Mexican government created the Zero Tolerance Area, where, as we mentioned earlier, it's illegal for all boats to enter at all. It's a positive step for conservation, and one that was long overdue. Scientists had been calling for protections for decades, but there had been almost no enforcement of conservation laws. And local fishermen hadn't been given alternatives to compensate them for their loss of income. It's a complex problem, so we asked the people in the field about trying to get gill nets out of the vaquita's habitat.
Hi, my name is Heidy Martinez, and I am the ship biologist on board Sea Shepherd boat. So the original mission actually was named Milagro. So Milagro started off with the retrieval of illegal nets. What was really shocking was that during the first couple of campaigns, a lot of Totoaba nets were retrieved. Within Milagro 3 to 6, there was about 1,113 nets that were retrieved from that area. And so those were a lot of nets that were in the water at all times. And 91% of those nets were all Totoaba fishing nets.
This, of course, made the Totoaba fishermen very mad. Some local fishermen saw this as a law imposed on them without consultation and enforced by foreigners, which, to a degree, was true. The fishermen wanted Sea Shepherd out of the Sea of Cortez, and Sea Shepherd wanted the fishermen's gill nets out of the Vaquita's habitat. The tensions reached an all-time high when a fisherman died in an encounter with one of the NGO's boats. Sea Shepherd and other NGOs had been targets of fishermen and criminal groups for months. Their gill net removal activities disrupted the Totoaba fisheries, and the friction quickly escalated to violence. Locals, possibly aligned with criminal groups, had been throwing Molotov cocktails, knives, and bottles of fuel at their boats. But in 2020, a speedboat driven by locals crashed into one of the Sea Shepherd's vessels. One of them tragically died. It had been enough. A new conservation approach needed to be found that took into consideration the fishermen's livelihoods and diminished the roles of criminal groups. Sea Shepherd changed its philosophy and went from getting directly involved with fishermen to simply reporting illegal fishing activities to the Mexican Navy. And just as importantly, their boats became vessels to support scientific expeditions.
I think one of the challenges Sea Shepherd faces in what we're doing is that not a lot of people actually know the current state of Sea Shepherd. When they think of Sea Shepherd and its efforts here, a lot of it is very filtered version and not in the most positive light. And I think that deters people from wanting to get involved, whether that's spreading awareness or even donating, where I think that there's a huge misconception of what our goal is here and what our mission is here and what we're doing recently and how well we have been collaborating with the Mexican government.
But despite having had approaches to wildlife conservation that not everyone agreed with, they still achieved a lot when Vaquita conservation was even less publicized than it is today.
I got so blessed and to be able to have the opportunity to be there for the 2023 Vaquita survey, be with so many scientists and see a Vaquita myself, that was incredible. But I think what was most life-changing than getting this experience was getting to hear, Dr. Barbara Taylor stating that the Vaquita would have gone extinct if it wasn't for Sea Shepherd. And to me, that changed any doubts or questions that I had about Sea Shepherd's involvement with it.
Sea Shepherd's support of scientific projects has played a positive role in Vaquita conservation. Up-to-date Vaquita numbers are always needed. Locals often dispute the Vaquita numbers, and at different times have called them not endangered or already extinct as a way to discredit conservation efforts. So let's go over how we know what we know and what scientists and conservationists are doing with that information.
The first estimates of vaquitas, and the first abundant estimates, were done using planes and ships and pretty standard methods that are used for telling how many animals are out there, whether they're on the land or in the water. And vaquitas were just particularly difficult because they're small, they never occur in big groups, they're usually singles or pairs, they don't splash. And so they're really hard to see, and they avoid noise. So they'd avoid the ships. So they were really a difficult species to work with, and even more difficult from an airplane because they live in really productive water that you can't see through, turbid water.
Those early studies showed a decline in Vaquita populations from 600 to 250 in just 11 years. But we needed more precise data. And if seeing them wasn't always possible, the next best thing was to try to hear them. For this, they use underwater recorders that log info every time they detect Vaquita echolocation clicks. They operate 24 hours a day, so the first sample, using multiple recorders, had about 3,000 combined days of data.
It was right when the government had protected a large area and wanted to know whether vaquita were recovering, and instead the acoustics revealed this catastrophic decline that eventually went to about 50% per year. So you're losing half of the species every single year. And without that acoustic, which we could monitor every single year, we wouldn't have been able to know the status and raise the alarm.
To this day, these acoustic tools are crucial in population studies. They're combined with visual studies and drone footage to give us the most accurate population data available. But the numbers we're getting are dire. The last study, done in 2024, showed that there are about 10 vaquitas left in this small protected area. Researchers have tried conservation measures like keeping the vaquitas in open water pens, but these unfortunately failed. This was part of a larger project called Vaquita CPR. It was a desperate attempt to rescue vaquitas, temporarily move them into a sea pen, and buy them time until the gill nets were removed. In November 2017, the team rescued a female vaquita. It was the first time scientists were learning how vaquitas would do in semi-captivity and cared for by people. Some cetaceans, like bottlenose dolphins, can live and even breed in captivity, so there was a bit of hope. At first, she seemed to be doing well, but after a few hours, things took a turn for the worst. She was struggling, and her condition was quickly declining. The team released her back into the wild, but she came back. She knew she needed help. The veterinarians and researchers did everything they could to save her, but unfortunately, she died that night. The necropsy showed that she basically died of stress, and so the team decided to stop their mission. In one day, the hopes for vaquita protection in semi-captivity were crushed. The team was heartbroken, but their new approach and their next steps were clear. The answer would have to come from changes in human behavior. The vaquita who tragically passed was named Esperanza, which means hope in Spanish. Her name would live on as the inspiration for Project Esperanza, a new concerted effort series of initiatives to protect the remaining vaquitas. There was a lot of work to do. First, we needed to stop illegal fishing, but avoiding direct confrontation with local fishermen was super important. So instead of targeting them, the focus switched to targeting their gill nets in protected areas. The Mexican Navy installed 193 concrete blocks with steel hooks. Any net that goes near them gets stuck in the hooks and gets destroyed. So as a result, gill net fishing in these areas decreased by 90%. According to Dr. Lorenzo Rojas-Bracho, these blocks are the main reason we still have vaquitas. The next thing that needed to happen was to convince fishermen to use more sustainable fishing gear. Local organizations like Pesca ABC and Pro Natura Noroeste have been trying to persuade the local fishermen to use hook and bait instead of gill nets. They've also removed hundreds of ghost nets, which are discarded nets in the ocean that continue to trap and kill animals. Maybe most importantly, conservation groups are engaging locals, and they're willingly participating in their projects.
We realize that if all the stakeholders agree to work jointly to protect vaquita in this case, or the species, you have a good chance of success. But if one of the stakeholders don't do their job, then the whole thing collapses. And probably that's one of the reasons why we have few vaquitas. And that stakeholder, unfortunately, were the fisheries authorities. The fisheries authorities were absent from any program to protect vaquitas.
The relationship between scientists and fishermen has improved. There's now better communication than ever before, and more locals are participating in surveys and protection campaigns. Scientists do Fisherman Days, where they take locals on their expeditions to explain their goals and methods. And thanks to the newly gained trust, fishermen are even helping to set up and retrieve the echolocation recorders.
Now we have had several workshops with the fishermen and sociologists and other experts to see where are the problems to transitioning to alternative fishing gear. But again, in this case, day one, you have to bring all the stakeholders and the fisherman principle, most important.
Locals are being involved and are receiving training to spot and identify vaquitas from boats, a dream job for any animal-loving person like you and me. So there is hope for the vaquita. Scientists, government officials, the Mexican Navy, fishermen, international NGOs, and independent supporters from around the world are united with the common goal of protecting the vaquita. Links to all of the groups mentioned in this episode are in the description, so click on them to join the team and help save the vaquita. So there you have it, one of the most complex conservation stories in the world, but not a unique one. All over the world, conservation efforts create conflict with locals who depend on the land or the sea to survive. So every conservation effort must include input and buy-in from local communities to be successful. So what should we talk about next? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. Thanks for watching. Bye.